We are already on the trip, and we only invited people who matter. Send the beach house keys, and do not make a scene." That was my stepmother, Mary Ann Collins, calling from my beach house, the one my late father, Grant Collins, left to me. She was telling me I was not family enough to be invited to my own family vacation. I smiled. Then I ended the call. 3 days later, I did send the keys, sealed inside an envelope. When Mary Ann opened it at a charity gala, in front of 85 guests, she screamed so loudly, the string quartet stopped. What did I put in that envelope? And why did it make a 58-year-old woman lose everything she spent 4 years taking? That is the part I need to tell from the beginning. My name is Avery Collins. I am 34 years old, and I work as a landscape architect in Massachusetts. This is the story of how I nearly lost the house my father left me, and how I finally found my voice. Let me take you back to a Tuesday morning, in late June, the day one phone call cracked the illusion. I was at my desk when my phone lit up, with the name Mary Ann. I expected polite small talk, the kind she used like a mask. Instead, she went straight to business, and her tone sounded practiced. She said they were leaving for the coast, that Brooke Collins was excited, and that Caleb Collins had already packed. Then she said I was not invited because I made things uncomfortable. I asked what that meant, and she said I asked too many questions. About money, about the foundation, about the house. She said it was better for everyone if I stayed out of the way. Then she asked for the keys, like she was requesting a kitchen pan. She said it would look bad if the neighbors saw them locked out. My stomach dropped, because that house was mine. Grant Collins made sure of it, and Henry Whitman, his closest friend, was the executor. Mary Ann knew that, and she still spoke like ownership was a feeling. I told her I would think about it, and she laughed softly, like the decision was already made. I sat very still after the call, and I stared at my calendar until the ink blurred. Mary Ann Collins had asked for my keys, like she owned my life, and she did it with a smile in her voice. I opened the folder on my laptop, the one labeled Dad, and I searched for Henry Whitman. Henry was Grant Collins' closest friend, and the executor of his estate, the only person my father trusted with truth. When Henry answered, his voice was warm, then it sharpened. The second I explained what happened, he told me to breathe. Then he told me something I did not expect. He had received messages from Mary Ann too. She had been pushing for months, asking Henry to let the house be placed into a family trust, so everyone could use it. Henry said my father wrote the will with clear intent. The house was mine, and it stayed mine. I asked why Mary Ann sounded so confident, and Henry paused, then said she had been testing boundaries. She used Brooke Collins to make it sound harmless, then used Caleb Collins to add pressure, then switched to threats when no one moved. Henry told me he would email me copies of the relevant documents, and he insisted I stop speaking to Mary Ann directly. He said I needed legal support, not family debates, because family debates are where facts get bent. He gave me a name, Elena Park, an attorney who handled estates and property disputes. Henry also reminded me that my father set up a foundation, and Mary Ann had been involved with it publicly. He said he did not want to speculate, but he wanted me alert. After we hung up, I stared at my hands and realized they were shaking. I had spent years trying to keep peace, and now peace was being used against me. I called Elena Park that same afternoon, and her assistant offered an appointment the next morning. That night, Brooke posted photos online of suitcases and coastal snacks, and a caption about family time. Caleb commented with beach emojis, like it was a joke. I did not reply, and I did not ask to be included. I saved the screenshots, and I wrote the date on a sticky note, because my father taught me one lesson very well. If someone wants your silence, start collecting records. Elena Park met me in a small office that smelled like coffee and clean paper. She read Henry Whitman email, then she asked for the timeline, one detail at a time. When I mentioned Mary Ann demanding the keys, Elena did not look surprised. She looked irritated. She explained that control often begins with access, and access begins with a simple request. Then she asked if Marianne sent anything in writing, and I told her not yet. Elena nodded, like she was expecting the next move. It arrived that evening, in my inbox, from Marianne Collins, personal email. The subject line sounded sweet, like she was planning a picnic. The attachment was not sweet. It was a document, asking me to sign over the beach house into a family trust, for the benefit of the Collins family. It framed it as unity, and stability, and tradition. It also included a section about allowing the foundation to use the property for events, which sounded charitable, until Elena pointed out the real problem. It would dilute my ownership, and make it nearly impossible to remove them later. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, because the language was so calm, and the intent was so aggressive. Elena told me not to sign anything, and not to respond emotionally. She said we would answer through formal channels, with a clear statement of ownership, and a request that they stop contacting me directly. She also told me to request recent financial statements for the Grant Collins Foundation, because public charity work can be used as cover for private spending. That word, cover, made my stomach clench. I called Henry Whitman on speaker, and Elena summarized the situation. Henry sounded tired, but firm. He said my father included a strict clause in his planning. Anyone who tried to steal from the estate or misuse the foundation would lose benefits tied to it. Elena listened carefully, then asked if Henry had concerns about irregular transactions. Henry said he had questions, and he had asked Marianne for clarity, but he was stonewalled. That night, Caleb Collins called me, with the voice of a mediator and the morals of a salesman. He said Marianne only wanted to keep the family close, and he said my father would not want conflict. I told Caleb my father also would not want fraud, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Caleb went quiet, then said I was being dramatic. I ended the call, and I saved the voicemail because the pattern was becoming very clear. The next morning, Elena Park filed a formal notice to Marianne Collins, stating that the beach house, Seacliff Cottage, belonged to Avery Collins, and no transfer would be considered. Elena also requested that all future communication go through counsel, because boundaries are only real when they are enforced. I expected Marianne to back off, at least for a moment. Instead, she escalated. By that afternoon, my phone lit up with a text from Brooke Collins, full of cheerful words and a photo that made my pulse spike. It was the front porch of Seacliff Cottage, my porch, with suitcases lined up beside the door. Brooke said they arrived, and asked where I kept the spare key. I read it twice, trying to understand how they were even inside. Then another photo came in. The living room, with my father's old ship painting on the wall. Brooke wrote that the house felt like family again, and she hoped I would stop being stubborn. I forwarded everything to Elena, and I called Henry Whitman. Henry said he did not authorize access, and he sounded furious in a way I had never heard. Elena asked one question that landed like a stone. Did Marianne ever have a key? I told her yes, years ago, when my father was alive, and he trusted her. Elena said, trust can turn into leverage, and leverage can turn into possession if you let it sit long enough. She instructed me not to drive to the cottage alone, and not to confront them in person. She said we would use lawful steps, and we would document every instance of unauthorized use. That night, Marianne emailed again, acting polite, acting wounded. She said I was overreacting, and she said the family needed the cottage for a short vacation. She said the neighbors would talk, and the foundation board would be disappointed if I made trouble. Elena laughed once, sharp and humorless. Then she told me this was not about neighbors. This was about someone trying to train me to surrender, one small step at a time. Henry Whitman sent me a copy of the deed and a letter from my father, written the year he set up the plan. In the letter, Grant Collins said he wanted me to always have a place that was mine, a place no one could take. I read that sentence 3 times, and my anger finally settled into focus. I told Elena I wanted to end the game, and I wanted to do it with evidence, not emotion. Elena said good, because evidence is the only language Marianne understands. Before Elena Park and I moved another inch, she told me to anchor the story. She asked why Seacliff Cottage mattered, beyond money and ego. So I told her about my father, Grant Collins, and the summer he bought that house. I was 11 then, and my mother had been gone 2 years. Grant was an estate attorney, with a quiet practice, and a steady way of speaking, that made people listen. He said the cottage would be our fresh start, and he meant it. Every summer we repainted fence posts, fixed warped porch boards, and ate takeout on the steps, while he explained roofs and beams like they were secrets. That porch is where I chose my career, and where my father became my safest person. Marianne Collins arrived when I was 18, polished and charming, and very good at winning rooms. I left for college, and I told myself it was fine, because my father seemed happy. Over time, Marianne became the voice at family dinners, and Brooke Collins learned her tone like a language. When Grant died, I thought grief was the hard part. I did not know paperwork could hurt more. Henry Whitman stepped in as executor, exactly as Grant planned. Henry told me the deed stayed in my name, and Grant also created the Grant Collins Foundation to fund coastal restoration projects. Elena listened, then asked if Grant ever worried about someone misusing what he built. I told her Henry mentioned a strict clause, one that would cut off anyone who tried to take what was not theirs. Elena nodded slowly, then she said we needed to look at the foundation, not just the cottage. She said people who grab property often grab money too, and they hide it behind charity. That afternoon, Elena introduced me to Samantha Reed, a forensic accountant with calm eyes and a blunt voice. Samantha asked for bank statements, vendor lists, board minutes, and event invoices. She explained how patterns show up, even when people try to bury them. She also told me to keep saving every message from Marianne, Brooke, and Caleb Collins, because pressure campaigns leave fingerprints. When I left Elena's office, my grief felt sharper, but my fear felt smaller. Seacliff Cottage was not just a place I loved. It was a promise Grant Collins wrote into wood and paper, and I was done letting anyone rewrite it. Samantha Reed worked fast, and she worked quiet. 3 days later, she called me and asked if I could meet Elena Park immediately. When I arrived, Samantha had a stack of printouts and a yellow marker in her hand. She said she started with the foundation expenses, because legitimate charities still have predictable habits. Then she showed me the anomalies, invoices that looked normal at first glance, but repeated the same strange details. Event rentals billed twice, floral charges that matched personal party themes, and consulting fees paid in neat monthly amounts. Samantha traced the consulting fees to a company registered under a mailing address that linked back to a relative of Marianne Collins. Samantha did not accuse anyone out loud. She only pointed at the map. Then she showed another set of records, travel reimbursements labeled as donor outreach, but timed perfectly with family trips. My throat tightened, because I could see the shape of the lie. Elena asked Samantha one clear question. Could this trigger the clause Henry Whitman mentioned? Samantha said yes. If the executor and the board confirmed misuse, the clause could activate consequences tied to benefits. Elena leaned back and told me Marianne was not trying to borrow my beach house. Marianne was trying to secure it before anyone looked too closely at the foundation. While we talked, Derek Harlan emailed Elena, claiming Marianne had rights to manage the cottage for family unity. Elena smiled, not kindly, and told me Derek was signaling panic. Samantha said the next step was to preserve evidence, and to choose where the truth would land hardest. Elena said Marianne cared about image more than anything, which meant the right setting could stop her games instantly. Henry Whitman called during the meeting, and his voice sounded tired but steady. He said a charity gala was scheduled soon, with Marianne as the face of the foundation. He said the guest list included donors, board members, and people who trusted Grant Collins' name. Elena looked at me and asked if I could stay calm in a room like that. I told her yes, because calm is what you use when you have receipts. Samantha gathered the documents into a clean packet, and she labeled each page with dates and sources. Elena said we would not yell, and we would not chase Marianne around the cottage. We would let Marianne walk into the spotlight, and then we would give her the truth, in a form she could not ignore. The week of the gala, my phone turned into a pressure machine. Caleb Collins called twice, using his gentle mediator voice, and asked me to be reasonable. Brooke Collins texted photos from Seacliff Cottage, smiling on the porch, like she was proving possession. Marianne Collins sent one more email, saying the neighbors were talking, and the foundation board would be embarrassed if I stayed stubborn. Elena Park told me to stop reading their words alone, and to forward everything to her office. Derek Harlan sent a formal letter next, claiming the cottage should be placed into a family trust for charitable use and unity. Elena answered with a single paragraph: ownership is clear, access is revoked, and further contact must go through council. Henry Whitman secured updated copies of the deed, the trust terms, and the clause Grant Collins wrote to protect his intent. Samantha Reed finalized her financial summary, showing the questionable payments and the vendor link that pointed back to Marianne's circle. Elena asked me one last time, "What do you want?" I told her I wanted my home back, and I wanted Marianne to stop using my father's name as camouflage. Elena said, "Then, we will be precise." She instructed me to prepare an envelope, sealed and plain, with a set of keys inside, because Marianne asked for keys. Behind the keys, Elena placed the evidence packet, and a short letter from Henry, stating that any misuse would trigger consequences. We did not add drama, because the facts were dramatic enough. Tessa Monroe, the gala manager, confirmed our arrival time, and confirmed the program order. She did not ask questions. She only said she would make sure the moment could not be dodged. On the night of the event, I wore a simple dress, and I kept my shoulders low. Elena stood beside me, and Henry Whitman stood behind us, steady like a witness. Samantha did not come for attention. She stayed in the background, ready to verify every line item. When we stepped into the ballroom, I saw Marianne Collins near the stage, glowing under soft lights, smiling like she owned everything. She looked at me, and her smile tightened. Then she walked toward me, and she asked for the envelope, like she expected surrender. I handed it over without shaking, and I watched her carry it into the center of the room. Marianne Collins walked toward the stage, holding my sealed envelope like a trophy. The ballroom lights caught her bracelets, and she smiled at donors, like she was the face of virtue. Tessa Monroe cued the program, and the microphone picked up a soft tap, as Marianne thanked everyone for supporting the Grant Collins Foundation. Henry Whitman stood beside me, calm and still, and Elena Park watched Marianne's hands, not her smile. Brooke Collins hovered near the front, excited and unaware, while Caleb Collins blended into the crowd, scanning faces for trouble. Marianne said she had a small family update, and she held up the envelope, as if it proved unity. She opened it slowly, enjoying the attention, then she pulled out the keys first. Her smile widened, because she expected surrender. Then she saw the documents behind the keys, neatly stacked, and tabbed, and labeled. The air changed. Marianne flipped the first page, and her eyes darted across the words, and her cheeks lost color. She tried to laugh, but the sound did not land. She turned another page, and another, like she could outrun what she was reading. Henry Whitman stepped forward and introduced himself as the executor of Grant Collins' estate, and he stated that Seacliff Cottage belongs to Avery Collins, by deed and by trust terms. Elena Park added that access is revoked, and any attempt to transfer ownership is unlawful. Samantha Reed stayed quiet until Elena nodded, then she explained the financial findings in plain language: unusual vendor payments, repeated consulting fees, and travel reimbursements that did not match charitable purpose. Marianne froze. Then she snapped that this was a misunderstanding and that she was being attacked. Elena did not raise her voice. She simply pointed out dates and amounts and the linked vendor address and the pattern of withdrawals. Someone near the back whispered Grant Collins' name, and the whisper spread like wind. Marianne gripped the microphone, and her voice climbed higher, but the room did not follow her. People do not follow a performance when the receipts are on the table. Marianne Collins tried to pivot, the way she always did, with charm first, then guilt, then anger. She said Avery Collins was emotional, and she said family grief makes people confused. Elena Park asked one simple question. If Avery is confused, why did Marianne send a transfer document? And why did she demand the keys? Marianne's mouth opened, then closed, because the answer was sitting in her hand. Derek Harlan pushed forward, trying to take control, and he demanded the packet be handled privately. Henry Whitman refused, and said the Foundation Board has a duty to know, because Grant Collins' name is attached to every dollar. Brooke Collins stared at her mother, then at me, like she had been handed a new reality. Caleb Collins stepped in with a soothing tone, asking for calm, and asking for the room to respect Marianne's feelings. Samantha Reed responded with numbers, not feelings, and she explained how the same vendor was paid repeatedly, under descriptions that did not match services. Marianne tried to cut her off, and her composure finally snapped. She screamed that the cottage is family property, and she screamed that Avery owes her gratitude, and she screamed that everyone should stop judging her. The scream echoed off the ballroom walls, and the string quartet fell silent, because the moment was too sharp to cover. Tessa Monroe moved quickly, whispering to staff, and the gala flow broke into clusters of shocked conversations. A board member approached Henry Whitman, asking if the documents were real. Henry said yes, and he offered to provide originals and filings. Another donor asked Derek Harlan if this meant fraud. Derek tried to deflect, but his voice shook. Marianne turned on me, eyes bright with rage, and she demanded I fix this, right now. I did not flinch. I told her my father gave me Seacliff Cottage, and I am honoring his intent. I told her the foundation exists to help the coast, not to fund private lifestyles. Marianne stepped back, as if the room moved away from her. When the spotlight fails, the mask has nowhere to hide. The morning after the gala, Elena Park called me early, and her voice was steady. She said Henry Whitman had convened an emergency board meeting, and the foundation accounts were being reviewed immediately. She also said a formal demand letter was ready, requiring Marianne Collins to return any keys, cease all access, and stop using the cottage in any capacity. Samantha Reed was already preparing a clean summary for auditors, because the story needed to be simple and provable. Henry Whitman arranged for a locksmith at Seacliff Cottage, and he asked me to meet him there with Elena, not alone. When we arrived, the porch looked the same, but my body felt different, because I knew I had backup. Brooke Collins' car was gone, and the house was quiet. Henry used his authority to ensure entry was lawful. Then the locks were changed, and the new keys were placed in my hand. The weight of those keys was not metal, it was relief. Inside, I found evidence of their vacation, groceries in the fridge, beach towels on the rack, and a framed photo of Marianne and Brooke on the mantel, positioned like a claim. Elena photographed everything, because documentation turns anger into action. Caleb Collins called while we stood in the living room, and he said Marianne was devastated, and he asked me to soften. I told Caleb, I am not hard, I am clear. I told him I will not trade my father's legacy for family comfort. Derek Harlan emailed Elena, threatening litigation, but the tone was defensive, not confident. Henry Whitman reminded him, in writing, that the clause Grant Collins included was designed for this exact situation. If someone tried to take what was not theirs, they would lose what they were trying to protect. That afternoon, Elena told me to prepare for the next phase, restitution, legal filings, and possible referrals, depending on what the audit confirmed. I walked through my father's cottage, touching the window frame and the old ship painting, and I felt grief and fury sit side by side. Then I sat on the porch steps, looked at the water, and realized I was not asking to be included anymore. I was reclaiming what was always mine. The day after the gala, Elena Park told me to expect a counterattack, because control does not surrender quietly. By noon, Derek Harlan filed a claim in probate court, arguing that Seacliff Cottage was a shared marital asset. His logic was thin, but strategic. He said Grant Collins used household income for taxes and repairs, so Mary Ann Collins deserved an equitable interest. Henry Whitman forwarded the filing to Elena, and his message was short. "They are trying to stall." Elena replied even shorter. "We will cut through it." Samantha Reed arrived at Elena's office with her finalized audit packet, stamped and signed, and she laid it on the table like a verdict. She had traced $340,000 in foundation money, sent through 17 transactions over 28 months. The payments were labeled consulting and event management fees, and they flowed to a limited liability company, registered in Delaware. The sole member listed on the registration was Brooke Collins. I felt my stomach turn, because Brooke had been texting me vacation photos from my own living room. Samantha showed us the transfers, then showed us the deposits into Brooke's personal account on the same days. Elena did not blink. She asked Samantha if the paper trail was clean. Samantha said it is clean, and they were not careful. Henry Whitman went silent for a long beat. Then he said Grant built that foundation for the coast, not for private spending. Elena drafted a motion that same afternoon to enforce the will, and to trigger the forfeiture clause Grant Collins wrote himself. Henry said the clause was clear. If a beneficiary or related party misappropriated estate or foundation funds, they would forfeit their inheritance share. Elena filed everything before close of business, and the court set a hearing date for the following week. Mary Ann tried calling me twice that night, then sent a message saying she was heartbroken and that I was destroying the family. I did not answer. Caleb Collins called, using the same soft voice, asking me to be reasonable, asking me to fix it quietly. I told him there is no quiet way to correct theft, and I ended the call. When I lay down to sleep, I did not feel calm, but I felt certain. They could file papers and spin stories and perform grief. I had the deed, the audit, and my father's intent in black and white. The hearing happened on a Monday morning, under bright courthouse lights, and a silence that felt heavy. Elena Park sat beside me with a binder, and Henry Whitman sat behind us, steady and watchful. Mary Ann Collins arrived in a tailored suit, chin lifted, with Derek Harlan at her side. Brooke Collins was not there. The judge began by reviewing the deed and the trust terms, and the words were plain: Seacliff Cottage belongs to Avery Collins. Derek argued for delay and asked for more time to investigate, but Elena presented the audit report and the transaction timeline. She explained the payments, the limited liability company in Delaware, the lack of invoices, and the direct transfers to Brooke Collins' account. The judge listened, asked a few tight questions, then turned to Henry. Henry stated that Grant Collins drafted the forfeiture clause to protect his estate and his foundation. He said Grant did not want his legacy turned into a personal account. Derek tried to challenge the clause as punitive, but the judge focused on intent and evidence. She said the language is precise, and the evidence of misappropriation is unambiguous. Then she read the ruling slowly, as if she wanted every word to land. The forfeiture clause is activated. Mary Ann forfeits her inheritance share, including a life insurance payout of $1,200,000 held in escrow, and any claim tied to the estate or the foundation. Seacliff Cottage is confirmed as the sole property of Avery Collins, without encumbrance or shared claim. Mary Ann did not cry. She did not speak. She sat motionless, staring forward. When the hearing ended, she stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked out without looking at me. I expected triumph, but what I felt was a strange quiet, like a door finally closed. Outside, Elena reminded me that accountability is a process, not a moment. Henry told me my father would be proud, and my throat tightened, because I could almost hear Grant Collins' voice, calm and certain, telling me to stand up straight. I did, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel small in my own story. The article went live a few days later, and it moved faster than I expected. A local reporter wrote about the gala revelation, the audit, and the state review of the Grant Collins Foundation. The story did not paint Mary Ann Collins as misunderstood. It painted her as exposed. By noon, My phone filled with messages, co-workers, old classmates, people I had not heard from in years. Some said they had no idea. Some said they always felt something was off. Henry Whitman told me the institutional fallout began immediately. Grant partners paused contributions, and donors asked for answers in writing. The foundation board froze discretionary spending and scheduled an independent review, because trust cannot be repaired with speeches. Marianne posted online that her family was going through a difficult time, and she asked for privacy. The post received a handful of polite comments and a flood of questions she did not answer. Caleb Collins left me a voicemail, saying I should stop now because the family had suffered enough. I saved it, and I did not respond, because his definition of suffering never included me. That evening, Elena Park forwarded a message from Derek Harlan. The tone had changed, less threat, more negotiation. He wanted a quiet settlement, and he wanted limits on public statements. Elena told him the court record is already public, and truth does not unpublish itself. Late that night, Brooke Collins finally sent me a message. She said she did not think it would get this bad, and she said she only did what Marianne told her to do. I read it twice, and I felt anger and pity collide, because I understood how control teaches compliance. I did not answer right away. I saved the message, and I stared at the ocean from my porch steps. The water looked the same, but my life did not. For the first time since Grant Collins died, Sea Cliff Cottage felt like mine again. Not because I won, but because I stopped surrendering. 2 weeks after the ruling, Marianne Collins tried a different doorway. She did not call me directly, and she did not show up at Sea Cliff Cottage. Instead, she sent a handwritten letter to Henry Whitman, addressed to me, like a careful loophole. Henry scanned it and forwarded it to Elena Park. Then Elena asked if I wanted to read it. I said yes, because I wanted to see what Marianne considered remorse. The letter was 3 pages of soft language, grief, and blame that never touched the center. Marianne wrote that she loved Grant Collins, that she built a life around his foundation, and that she felt betrayed by everyone turning on her. She wrote that Brooke Collins was young and overwhelmed and influenced. She wrote that she never meant to hurt me, and she hoped we could move forward as a family. She did not say the word theft. She did not say misuse. She did not say I lied and staged it, and I am sorry. Elena asked me what I heard in the silence. I told her Marianne was not apologizing. Marianne was auditioning for forgiveness. Elena nodded, and she said, "Then you do not reward the audition." Henry Whitman replied with one sentence, "Contact must go through counsel, and no direct communication will be accepted." That afternoon, Derek Harlan requested mediation, claiming Marianne wanted a private resolution. Elena responded that the court ruling is final, and the restitution framework will be handled through auditors, not emotional meetings. Caleb Collins called me that night anyway, and he said I should be the bigger person. I asked him why being bigger always meant being quieter. Caleb sighed, then told me I was holding a grudge. I told him I am holding boundaries, and I ended the call. I sat on the porch after that, listening to the water, and I realized I was not waiting for a perfect apology anymore. I was building a life where I did not need one to breathe. Samantha Reed met with the foundation board, and her work became the backbone of every next step. She presented the audit in clean categories: vendor misuse, travel reimbursements, event charges, and the direct benefit to Brooke Collins' account. The board voted to remove Marianne Collins from any leadership role, and they suspended her access to accounts and donor lists. A restitution plan was drafted, and it was not symbolic. It required repayment of the $340,000, plus penalties, plus legal fees, on a structured schedule. Elena Park explained to me that restitution is not mercy, it is repair, and it keeps the story from being rewritten later. Henry Whitman also pushed for governance changes: 2 signature approvals on spending, independent annual audits, and a public statement that corrected the record without turning it into gossip. The statement was short and direct. It said the foundation identified misuse, took corrective action, and reaffirmed Grant Collins' mission. It did not mention my private grief, and it did not need to. The donors responded better than I expected. Some paused contributions, but many said transparency matters, and they respected the cleanup. One donor wrote me a note saying Grant Collins would be proud. I cried when I read it, because pride was the one thing I missed most. Derek Harlan continued trying to bargain, offering Marianne reputation in exchange for quiet terms. Elena told him reputation is not a currency the court accepts. Brooke Collins' attorney requested a separate deal, claiming she acted under Marianne control. Samantha said, "Control explains behavior, but it does not erase receipts." The plan moved forward anyway. When the first repayment hit the foundation account, Samantha notified the board, and Henry notified me. I stared at the confirmation email for a long time, because the money looked ordinary on screen, but I knew what it represented. It represented a line being drawn and kept. In late August, I drove to Seacliff Cottage alone for the first time since everything exploded. The locks were changed, the spare key was stored securely, and the porch light turned on when I stepped close. I opened the door and breathed in the familiar salt air, mixed with old wood and lemon cleaner. I walked room to room slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to claim each space with attention. I took down the framed photo Marianne left on the mantel, and I put it in a box, because my home is not a stage for her story. I set my father's ship painting back to the center, and I wiped dust from the frame with my sleeve. I found a stack of foundation brochures in a drawer, leftovers from Marianne events, and I recycled them, because I wanted my house to be a house again. That evening I called Henry Whitman and thanked him, and I thanked Elena Park and Samantha Reed too, because they turned chaos into structure. Henry told me he is still cleaning up the foundation, and he said it will take time, but it will be clean. Elena reminded me that boundaries are not one conversation. They are a practice. Samantha told me to keep my records, even when life feels quiet. Because quiet is when people sometimes test doors again. I hung up, cooked a simple dinner, and ate it on the porch steps, watching the tide move. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I was borrowing my own life. I felt like I was living it. I went inside, locked the door once, and I slept in my father's house with my shoulders relaxed. When the sun came up, I made coffee, and I opened the window, and I let the ocean air fill the kitchen. I thought about Grant Collins' promise that this place would always be mine, and I realized he was right. It is mine, and now I know how to keep it that way. A week after I stayed at Seacliff Cottage, Brooke Collins emailed Elena Park. She did not email me directly, which told me she finally understood boundaries have teeth. Brooke asked for a chance to explain, and she claimed she did not know the foundation payments were wrong. She wrote that Marianne Collins handled everything, and she only signed forms when asked. Elena forwarded the email to me and asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted the truth, not a performance. Elena scheduled a video call with Brooke lawyer present, and with Henry Whitman on the line, because Henry represented my father intent. Brooke appeared on screen with swollen eyes, and she started with a speech about family pressure. Then Samantha Reed asked one precise question. "Did you register the Delaware company? Yes or no?" Brooke hesitated. Then she said yes, but she said it was just paperwork. Samantha asked who received the deposits, and Brooke admitted the funds landed in her account. She said Marianne told her it was reimbursement, and that it was normal for foundations to pay for outreach work. Henry Whitman asked if she ever did that work. Brooke went quiet, then said she did not really. The silence after that felt heavy, like the truth finally had space. Elena explained the legal reality, intent matters, but receipts matter more, and the restitution plan would continue. Brooke asked if she could repay separately, to keep her own life from collapsing. Elena said she could, through counsel, on an agreed schedule, but she cannot rewrite the facts. When the call ended, I did not feel satisfied. I felt sad, because Brooke was not a mastermind. She was a passenger in Marianne control. But passengers still leave footprints. That night, Caleb Collins texted me, saying I should forgive Brooke because she is young. I did not respond. I saved the message, and I stared at the ocean until the sky turned dark. In September, Caleb Collins tried again, and this time he aimed for my empathy. He invited me to lunch, saying he wanted to talk as family. No lawyers, no paperwork, just healing. Elena Park told me not to go, but I wanted to see the play in daylight. So I agreed on one condition: a public cafe, and Elena permission to have Lauren present as a witness. Caleb did not like that, but he agreed, because he thought he could still steer the conversation. At the cafe, Caleb arrived early, already holding a table like a stage. He started with stories about Grant Collins, about how much my father loved Harmony. Then he switched to Marianne Collins' suffering, the public humiliation, the gossip, the loss of status. He said I got my cottage back, so why keep pushing? I asked him why he never called when I was grieving, and why he only called when Marianne needed cover. Caleb said he was trying to keep peace. I told him peace without truth is just control with better lighting. Caleb frowned and said I was harsh. I reminded him the cottage was mine the whole time, and Marianne tried to take it anyway. Caleb leaned forward and said the family wants a holiday together, and he hinted that donors might come back faster if I looked forgiving. I almost laughed, because it was not about holidays, it was about image. I told Caleb I do not negotiate my safety for someone else's reputation. I told him if he wants to help, he can stop carrying messages and stop calling me difficult. Caleb went quiet. Then he said I am breaking the family. I told him the family broke when Marianne used my father's name like a shield, and when everyone looked away. I left the cafe without yelling, and I felt cleaner for it. By October, the foundation had new controls, new signatures, and a new tone. Henry Whitman kept me updated, not with gossip, but with milestones. The board completed an independent review, and they issued a public update confirming corrective action. Some donors returned slowly, and some stayed away. But the foundation was no longer a stage for Marianne Collins. Samantha Reed monitored repayment, and she reported each deposit like a heartbeat returning to normal. Elena Park helped me update my estate plan too, because she said hard lessons should become protection. She ensured Seacliff Cottage was insulated, and that no one could claim access through sentiment again. I spent weekends at the cottage, sanding a railing, painting a door, and listening to the tide. I invited Henry one afternoon, and we sat on the porch steps, talking about Grant Collins as a real person, not a symbol. Henry said Grant worried about manipulation, and he wrote the clause because he knew charm can become a weapon. Hearing that made me feel less foolish, because it meant my father saw the risk too. One evening, I found an old note Grant left in a kitchen drawer, a grocery list, and a line at the bottom that said, "Avery, protect your peace." I held that paper for a long time, because it felt like a message across time. I did not miss Marianne. I missed the family I hoped we could be. But hope is not a plan, and boundaries are. So I built a fall that belonged to me, quiet mornings, honest friends, and a house by the ocean that I no longer shared with people who tried to steal it. In early November, Tessa Monroe called Elena Park, and Elena called me right after. Tessa said Marianne Collins was telling people she would host a private donor weekend at Seacliff Cottage, framed as a tribute to Grant Collins. Tessa sounded uncomfortable, because she knew the gala fallout, and she knew the cottage was not Marianne property. Elena told me not to contact Marianne, and she asked Henry Whitman to send a written notice to the board, stating there is no authorized event at the cottage. Samantha Reed flagged the risk too, because unauthorized events create new expenses and new excuses. Henry sent the notice that afternoon, and he copied Derek Harlan, because daylight matters. 2 days later, I drove to the cottage for a quiet weekend, and I saw fresh tire marks on the gravel. My stomach tightened, but I did not panic. I called Elena from the car, and Elena told me to stay in a public spot and call local police for a civil standby. When the officer arrived, we walked to the porch together. The door was locked, but the lock showed scratches, like someone tried and failed. A wreath hung crooked, and a laminated schedule was taped to the window, listing donor brunch and coastal walk. It was mine. It was another performance. The officer documented the scene, and I took photos for Elena. Then I saw Mary Ann car at the far end of the street, idling, like she wanted to be seen, but not confronted. She did not step out, she did not wave, she just watched. The officer asked if I wanted to approach, and I said no. I said the point is not a fight, the point is a record. I went inside after the officer left, and I removed the schedule, and I placed it in a folder. I did not tear it up, because evidence is stronger than anger. That night, Elena filed a notice of attempted interference, and Henry requested the board formally bar Mary Ann from representing the foundation in any capacity. Derek Harlan responded with a polite denial, but his tone was thin, and Elena said that means they know. I sat on the porch with a blanket, listened to the tide, and felt something solid settle. Mary Ann was not chasing memories. She was chasing access. Because access is how she stayed powerful. Now access had locks, witnesses, and consequences. The board meeting happened the following week, and Henry Whitman invited me, not to speak, but to watch. Elena Park attended as my counsel, and Samantha Reed attended as the accountant who could answer questions without emotion. The room was quiet, tense, and tired. Like everyone wished the truth was smaller. Henry opened with a simple statement: the foundation exists to honor Grant Collins' mission, and it cannot do that while pretending. Samantha presented the timeline again, the 17 transfers, the Delaware company tied to Brooke Collins, and the personal deposits that followed. Then she added one more piece, travel reimbursements labeled donor engagement, that matched the dates of the unauthorized cottage weekend plan. The board members looked down at their papers, because paper does not blink. Derek Harlan spoke for Mary Ann Collins, insisting she acted in good faith, and that she was being punished publicly. Elena answered with facts, and she reminded the board that public image does not erase private misuse. Henry asked for a vote on 3 actions: removal of Mary Ann from any advisory role, a formal bar from representing the foundation, and cooperation with any external review, including referrals if required. The vote passed, unanimous. Derek looked like he swallowed something bitter, and I realized the game was changing. Marian could charm donors, but she could not charm a spreadsheet. After the meeting, Henry told me the foundation would issue a final corrective statement, and then it would stop discussing Mary Ann publicly. He said they would focus on rebuilding trust through work, not through speeches. Samantha said the restitution schedule would continue, and Brooke would have her own repayment terms, because accountability must land where the money landed. Elena reminded me to keep my home separate from the foundation, even when people begged for symbolism. She said Mary Ann will try to use nostalgia as leverage again, because nostalgia is cheaper than honesty. That evening, I went back to Seacliff Cottage, opened my notebook, and wrote one sentence: I will not rent out my peace to buy someone else's reputation. Then I closed the notebook, made tea, and let the ocean air fill the kitchen. Thanksgiving arrived with cold wind and bright sun, and for the first time in years, I did not dread a family table. I hosted at Seacliff Cottage, not as a statement, but as a choice. Henry Whitman came with a pie and an old photo of Grant Collins on the porch, smiling like he knew the tide by name. Elena Park arrived after court filings, still in work mode, but she softened when she saw the kitchen. Samantha Reed brought a small bouquet, and she said she prefers quiet victories. Tessa Monroe stopped by too, because she wanted to see the house that caused the gala shock, and because she said she was proud I did not fold. Caleb Collins did not come, and I did not invite him. Mary Ann Collins did not come, and I did not wonder if she would. We cooked, we laughed, and we spoke about Grant as a real man, not a public brand. Henry told stories about Grant kindness, and about how he hated manipulation. Elena told me something simple: your father planned for this, because he trusted you to finish it. I felt my throat tighten, but I did not break. After dinner, we walked along the beach, and the wind stung our cheeks, and it felt honest. When we came back inside, I lit a candle on the mantel, and I placed my father's ship painting where it belonged. I realized the cottage felt different now, not because the rooms changed, but because the fear had moved out. Later, when everyone left, I washed dishes slowly and listened to the quiet. I found myself waiting for a call, a guilt message, a last-minute pressure. Nothing came. I sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, and looked at the dark water. I did not feel lonely. I felt free. Grant Collins' gift was never just property. It was permission to build a life without begging. That night I locked the door once, and I slept with my shoulders down. By December, the story stopped feeling like a headline and started feeling like my life again. The foundation continued its work, and Henry Whitman sent me updates that were boring in the best way. New controls, clean audits, and grants approved for real coastal projects. Samantha Reed confirmed the restitution payments were arriving on schedule, and she said consistency matters more than apologies. Elena Park closed the last property protection steps and ensured Seacliff Cottage could not be pulled into anyone else's narrative again. Derek Harlan tried one final negotiation, asking for a mutual statement about unity, and Elena declined. She said unity without truth is just another costume. Brooke Collins' repayment terms were signed, and Brooke stopped sending messages through other people. Marianne Collins went quiet in public, and I heard through the grapevine that she was telling her version to anyone who would listen. I did not chase the version, because my version was backed by deeds, audits, and court rulings. Caleb Collins sent one holiday text, saying he hopes I can move on. I did not respond, and for once, silence felt like strength, not surrender. On a cold Saturday, I found another note in my father's handwriting, tucked in a book on the shelf. It was a short line: protect what is yours, and do not apologize for it. I held the paper for a long time, then placed it in my drawer with the deed copy. That night I made soup, turned on soft music, and watched snow start to fall outside the window. The cottage felt steady, like it belonged to the season, and to me. I realized the ending I needed was not Marianne admitting everything on a stage. The ending I needed was waking up in my own home, making coffee, and knowing the locks are mine, the choices are mine, and the future cannot be signed away by anyone else. By the time spring arrived, the noise finally thinned out, and the quiet stayed. Henry Whitman told me the foundation completed its independent review, and the controls were permanent now. Samantha Reed confirmed the repayment schedule continued without gaps, and she said the numbers looked stable again. Elena Park closed the last loose ends, and reminded me that closure is not a feeling, it is a structure. Marianne Collins did not regain her platform, and she did not regain access to Seacliff Cottage. She sent one more message through Derek Harlan, asking for a private conversation, and Elena answered no. Caleb Collins tried once, with a gentle text about family healing, and I did not reply. For the first time, I did not feel guilty about silence. I drove to the cottage on a Friday afternoon, windows down, salt air filling my car. I unlocked the door once, stepped inside, and everything felt like mine in the simplest way. I cooked dinner, washed dishes, and listened to the tide move, without bracing for the next demand. The next morning I walked along the beach, then came back and opened the kitchen drawer where I keep my father notes. I read the line again: protect what is yours, and do not apologize for it. I realized my father gave me more than property. He gave me permission. Permission to say no. Permission to ask questions. Permission to keep records. Permission to walk out of rooms that only love me when I comply. If you are hearing this, and you have a relative who calls you difficult, when you hold a boundary, I want you to remember something. People who benefit from your silence will always call your truth a problem. Seacliff Cottage is mine on paper, and mine in practice, because I refused to trade it for peace that was fake. I did not win by shouting, I won by staying clear, and letting evidence speak. I turned the porch light on at dusk, watched it glow, and felt my shoulders drop. Then I locked the door once, and I went to bed knowing the difference between family and control.